1979, it was a long time ago, there was a small, not quite small, but there was an accident in one of the nuclear plants in the U.S. Could have been disastrous, really. It was in Pennsylvania, and the plant was called I forgot the name. 3 Mile. Yeah, 3 Mile Island. It was famous at the time because of the accident. The 3 Mile Island. Within the reactor, it's called reactor, where there's a nuclear, and there was a bubble, hydrogen bubble created. It became like this big, the size of this room. Could be really dangerous because the bubble, hydrogen bubble, is very explosive. Could have been dangerous. Could have been disastrous. And it became, smaller later days in around April 1st and 2nd. And it turned out to be, not a major accident, thankfully. But the scientist who was in charge of the whole facility was in distress, for sure. And he actually wrote a letter to a radio pastor at that time. It was a long ago, 1979. He wrote this letter. Let me read it for you. Apparently, everything is going to come down at 3 Mile Island. I'm glad because I live nearby. My own life is kind of a hydrogen bubble that is about to blow up. Or maybe there's going to be a meltdown. My anxiety about my life is just at an unbearable level. I feel such awful guilt about things I've done in the past. Like the accident at 3 Mile. It's due to human errors, my errors. Now, just a few sins in my life seem to have triggered something terrible. Frankly, the others here have been worried about 3 Mile Island, but I've been worried about my inward life. If the nuclear goes, that might solve my problems, but I feel as though I will explode first. I need peace. I haven't lost my mind, my children, or my wife. In fact, they really aren't aware of how far my life has gotten out of hand. Can you understand how I feel? What bothered him most was not the accident that was happening in the facility, but the turmoil, spiritual meltdown he was experiencing inside. We need not just a temporary rest from the physical world, from our current difficult situations, but we need the rest that is deeply satisfying and lasting. St. Augustine says this, "O God, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until we find our rest in you." According to the Bible, God promised to give His people His rest, His own rest. So it's the Sabbath rest. Wait a minute, the Sabbath rest? It sounds ancient to us, right? The Sabbath rest. It's more like a property of Jewish people or some kind of an ancient term that we can't really relate to easily. Sabbath. Is it Sunday Sabbath? That's a question we ask, right? Well, you could say that, but it's not exactly according to the Bible. If you read the whole Bible and understand what Sabbath really means, it's not Sunday. It's not today. Today is not Sabbath. Well, but we have to understand what Sabbath means really before we understand God's rest that He's giving us. He's sharing it with us. So in Genesis, like everyone knows here. For 6 days, God created all creation. And on the seventh day, He rested. And notice that. On the sixth day, male and female were created. And on the seventh day, God rested. What else did He do? He blessed the day and sanctified that day. So the climax or consummation and completion of His creation is not humans. We have to understand this. The completion of the climax and the pinnacle of the creation, His creation, is not humans, but the rest of God on the seventh day. What are the implications of this? Why does this matter? Simply put, your life will never be completed until you enter the rest of God. You will never feel completed or satisfied until you enter His rest. So the rest, deeply satisfying and lasting rest, doesn't come from yourself. Doesn't come from any creation that was made during the first 6 days. No, the rest comes from the seventh day. If you don't, you're not going to feel blessed or sanctified or satisfied until you find out, until you have rest of God, from God. So here's a little note. 666, 36. What does it mean really in Revelation? It's we've seen it in movies. 666, it's incompletion. There's no rest. 666, repetition of no rest. That's like hell. So the mark of 666, 666 means no rest. Still working. Keeps working. You have to keep working. There's no rest. That's the hell. True hell you can experience in your own life. What is the problem then? Do you come to Sunday? Do you come to church on Sunday and is it a rest? No, not at all. No. You just come here and worship and listen to the Word. But here's the thing. Doing all that could be utterly meaningless if you don't do this. I'm serious. Could be utterly meaningless. R.C. Sproul, who passed away last year. Is it last year? 2 years ago? Maybe? Yeah. He said this, we could be theoretically theistic person. Theism means you believe in God, the existence of God. But you can be practically atheist. So you know that God exists, but the way you live is as if there's no God. Or you're living as if God doesn't exist. And theoretical theism and practical atheism, and he says this, we live as if God did not exist, or if He did exist before. He was so remote from us, and He has no relevance to our daily lives. And if you do that, if you keep doing that, you're not going to be, restful. You're not going to enter His rest. So we're not creating, we are utterly unable to create our own rest by ourselves. It's more like a partaking. So participating in His rest on the seventh day. How do you enter His rest? Here's the thing. Holiness. You have to be holy. So rest and holiness are almost the same term. You have to be living a holy life. When you hear the word holy, what comes to your mind? Like smiling, right? Always smile and being kind to each other. That's good. That's a symptoms of, trying to be holy and nice too, right? But it's not. It's not. Almost nothing to do with holiness. It's a little bit, it has a little to do with holiness. The Bible is talking about. Holiness is first, before I do what holiness really means, you can be holy when you hear His voice first. You have to hear His voice. That's the first step of being holy, to be holy, so that you can, partake, participate, or experience His rest. That's the first step. You have to have ears to hear His voice. What does it mean to hear His voice? Can we hear His voice, actual voice? Is there anyone around you in your life or from the past? Do you remember anyone who said that? If there was anyone said that, probably it was the person was misunderstanding what the voice of God, hearing of the voice of God means. Well, in the Bible, Moses actually spoke with God face to face. He was the only one. And the prophets actually heard a voice, the actual voice from God. Prophets, and also David. David was a prophet too. David heard the voice, and Solomon heard the voice. And nowadays, nobody can hear the voice of God. Why is that? Because Jesus was Himself the voice of God. The Word of God made flesh. We'll get to that later. Not in this sermon. But, so, how do you hear His voice? Through His written Word. Through His written Word. I know that, Pastor. I've been here for a while. So I know that God speaks through the Word. We all know that. But by simply reading the Word, can you hear the voice of God? Can you hear His voice? Well, most of the time, my mind gets empty when I hear the Word of God. When I read the Word of God, when I read the Bible, it's like my mind, the Word of God is like water running through the pipe. So it just passes away, passes through my mind, and I forget about it. Is it the voice of God? Listen to what the author of Hebrews says. For good news came to us just as to them, but the message they heard did not benefit them, because they were not united by faith with those who listen. It's kind of confusing to understand this passage, verse in ESV. But NASB translation is, I think, better. Let me read it for you. The word they heard did not profit them because it was not united, mixed, blended with faith in those who heard. So it's like the Word of God and faith. They combine. They should combine. So it's like a blender. You know, in the morning, usually in the summertime, we enjoy blenders, right? Using blenders. So all kinds of different ingredients we put. They're different, but they become one. And the result, the outcome is totally different from before. Exactly the same. You blend the Word of God with your faith. So, Today's passage, the main message is, if you hear His voice, do not harden your heart. So what does the hardening of heart means? So it goes back to the wilderness story of Israel. And the symptom of hardened heart is the question, asking the question. The heart asking the question. What is the question? Is the Lord really among us or not? Is God really with me or not? Asking the question. The core of the question is not really being curious. No, He knows. We know that. We are taught that God is with us. But we don't trust it. We don't believe it. We have decided not to believe it deep in our heart. That's the disobedience that the passage is talking about. So that's why the Word of God is just like water running through the pipe. They don't benefit them because you don't believe it in your heart. And notice that it says today. Today. Is it only Sunday you can have rest by reading, by hearing His voice? No. Today. Every day is the refreshment of His rest. See, God is not stingy. God is generous. God is sharing. God is giving you the rest you need so that you may feel completed and satisfied, even in weekdays. So the Sabbath rest we are supposed to enjoy is not just the Sunday Sabbath, not just the day of rest on Sunday, but every day, every moment, today, every day, you can hear His voice and you can experience rest, true rest, His rest. He's always restful. His repose, His tranquility, free of anxiety, really. And what troubles most in your difficult situations is not just actually the situation, but what troubles most is you lost your way in your heart. You don't know how to think, how to understand, how to make sense of the situation, how to make sense of the person. That it is the thing that troubles you most. And what about the voice? When I truly believe the Word, when I hear the voice, what does it do? What does the voice do to you? Let me read it for you. For the Word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword. Piercing to the division of soul and of spirit, of joint and of marrow. So what does it do? Discerning the thoughts and intentions of your heart. So being holy is to know God's way in your heart. So by knowing God's ways in your heart, you can finally have rest. Doesn't matter what happens outside the world. It's the inside of you that troubles you. And you can only have God's rest when you're holy. And how you become holy? You know God's ways. Here is knowing. For others, for non-Christians, knowing and believing are two different things. But for us, they're not. If you really know Christ, you can't just, ignore it or distrust Him. If you know His personality and how big His love is, you can't just separate knowing and believing. They're the same thing. If you know it, you believe it. For example, you know there's a big sale in, Chanel, like 95% today. If you know it, what you gonna do? You're gonna go and buy some. That's exactly what knowing and believing, also action. They're one. Today's message is simple. If you hear today, if you hear His voice, do not harden your heart.